Well, here's our next story. Let's do another story because this also focuses on the cops. And I don't know if you remember, but there was a big plot that a bunch of right-wingers were trying to kidnap the governor, the Democratic governor of Michigan. Do you remember this? The FBI says it foiled. Hang on, I'm pretty sure I have. The FBI says it foiled. Hang on. A plot to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Witmer, and this is from October 8th, 2020. Do you remember that? So when the FBI says it foiled a plot to kidnap Governor Witmer, this headline fails to mention it was an FBI plot to kidnap Governor Witmer. Okay, that's the spoiler alert. Here's Keith Olbermann. You know Keith Olbermann has lost his mind. He says, new video, how the terror plot against Governor Witmer fits into Trump's plans to nullify. Now, you know that Keith Olbermann is exactly like Donald Trump in his shadow, as the Jungians say. You know that's why he's obsessed. Anybody who's this obsessed with Donald Trump is Donald Trump. And then they get to project all that stuff they hate about themselves onto Donald Trump. That's called projection. Everybody's heard of that psychological term. That's what guys like Keith Olbermann are doing, because he's just like Trump. He's just a big narcissist, just a big megalomaniac, and just a big liar. He says, new video, how the terror plot against Governor Witmer fits into Trump's plans to nullify the election, and why he'd run again in 24. 2 minutes of essentials below. The full 15 minutes of episode number 2 of The Worst Person in the World live at YouTube here. So, I have to say I agree that a show starring Keith Olbermann should be called The Worst Person in the World. That is fair. That is fair. Ex-FBI director Andrew McCabe, Trump is a person most responsible for Gretchen Witmer kidnapping plot. This is amazing. And Tino Blatire tweets it out like it's real. Really, Trump is the most responsible? More than the actual kidnappers? No kidding? Yes, that's what MSNBC will have you think. Here's from The Intercept. Echoes of FBI entrapment haunt failed plot to kidnap Gretchen Witmer. It becomes really dicey when there are nearly as many informants as there are defendants, a former federal prosecutor told The Intercept. And that's from March 9th, 2022. Oh, turns out FBI was the most responsible. So it was more than Trump. I'm going to say the FBI, more responsible than Trump. This 2 men were found not guilty. This just in. This is from April 8th. Just in, 2 men were found not guilty of attempted kidnapping of Governor Witmer, and a mistrial has been declared for other counts. Wow. So the 2 men acquitted of plotting kidnap Michigan governor in high-profile trial. So let me just... I mean, look what a great job they did on this. Imagine how they must be handling Muslim terrorism. It was one of the country's highest profile domestic terrorism cases, an alleged plot to kidnap Governor Gretchen Witmer of Michigan, eliminate her security detail, and perhaps touch off a civil war. How would that touch off a civil war? I've heard more realistic plans from Charlie Manson, but okay, here we go. But after a trial in which prosecutors portrayed the 4 defendants as threats to democracy, jurors on Friday acquitted 2 of the men and said they were unable to reach verdicts on the other 2. Threats to democracy, and we just let them go. The result was a major blow to the Justice Department, which during the Biden administration has made domestic terrorism one of its top priorities in the aftermath of the January 6, 2021 riot at the U.S. Capitol. Well, at least they got, okay. This was a major blow to the Justice Department. At least they got blown, but I don't think they mean it like that. The defendants in the Michigan trial were arrested weeks before the 2020 election, and the case was seen by some as revealing increasingly combative discourse among certain right-wing groups, really increasingly combative discourse. Did they want to put the unvaxxed in camps or something? But a series of missteps during the investigation and the eventual failure to win any conviction against the men who went on trial raises questions about the ability of federal law enforcement when it infiltrates right-wing groups to develop convincing cases without infringing on the rights to speak freely and own weapons, which sure does. Can't we suppress those questions, though? The midterms are coming up. Prosecutors built their case off a trove of audio recordings and encrypted text from 2020 in which some of the men vented about COVID-19 restrictions, spoke about political violence, and debated the best way to kidnap Mrs. Witmer, a Democrat, from her vacation home in northern Michigan. Yet the very existence of those recordings and text conversations underscored defense lawyers' theory of the case, that the supposed plot had been conceived and nudged ahead by a network of FBI agents and informants who preyed on the worst instincts of those loose-lipped targets. So we've seen this before. What they do is they find the most easily influenced pawns and dupes. Some of them are mentally defective usually. The FBI encourages them to do some criminal terrorist activity, and then they arrest them right as they're doing it, and they go, look, we foiled a plot. Give us more money. Aren't we great? That's what they're doing there. This is what happened. The FBI cooked this plot up. They found some dupes to go along with it. There's more FBI agents and informants than there are criminals trying to work this plot into happening. This is what's going on here. Okay? All right. The defense lawyers described the men on trial as big talkers who were never going to commit any kidnapping. Words hurt you? Words scare you? Daniel Harris, who was acquitted of all the charges against him, said when he took the stand in his own defense. Mr. Harris insisted that he never joined any plot. He referred derisively to an FBI informant, Dan Chappell, who had testified earlier in the trial that he feared the group's anti-government and anti-law enforcement rhetoric would escalate into violence. The jury of 6 men and 6 women, which deliberated for nearly a week, did not reach any verdict on the charges against the 2 defendants, Barry Croft and Adam Fox, who prosecutors portrayed as having a leadership role. A judge declared a mistrial for those men and ordered them held in jail. Others have also been charged in connection with the investigation. 2 men, Ty Garbin and Caleb Franks, pleaded guilty before the trial to kidnapping conspiracy and testified against the defendants in the federal case. 8 other men were charged with related crimes in state court. During weeks of testimony of the federal courthouse in Grand Rapids, prosecutors showed jurors inflammatory social media posts and chat messages from the defendants and presented audio secretly recorded by Mr. Chappell and other informants. One former co-defendant who pleaded guilty testified that he hoped to set off a chain of events that would prevent Joseph Biden Jr. from being elected president and would perhaps foment a civil war. That was the whole plan. They wanted to kick that off by kidnapping the governor. Niles Kessler, a federal prosecutor, said during they're trying to. This is amazing. They've got these mental defectives in Michigan, and they're trying to scare the country into that they were going to start a civil war. What? And if they didn't get Whitmer, they're going to get Frank Sinatra's kid. But the prosecution's case was hampered by the lack of clarity and what exactly the men were accused of plotting. No attack ever took place, and no final date for an abduction was ever set. Testimony showed the details of the alleged plan sometimes differed drastically from prosecution witness to prosecution witness. So the prosecution couldn't keep their own story straight on the stand. That's how bad this was. Their stories would vary wildly. So the prosecutor's case against the kidnap plot was hampered by there being no actual plot. That was what hampered their case. Okay. The FBI informant, Mr. Chappell, said he believed that the group planned to kill Miss Witmer, whose handling of the COVID-19 pandemic had infuriated the men. Mr. Garbin, who earlier pled guilty in the case, said he thought the group of men might abandon the governor in a boat in the middle of Lake Michigan. Okay. There was no plan to kidnap the governor, and there was no agreement between these four men, Joshua Blanchard, a lawyer for Mr. Croft, said in closing arguments. He said the government tried to conjure up a conspiracy by using a network of informants and undercover agents, and that without a plan, the snitches needed to make it look like there was movement toward a plan. Gee, it's almost like always outsourcing everything all the time might be a small flaw in capitalism. I'm just saying. R. Michael Belota, a defense lawyer who previously worked as an assistant U.S. attorney in Detroit, said that the sheer quantity of informants might have hampered the case. Might have hampered the case? I don't know what they needed to have I don't know that they needed to have as many informants as they had, Mr. Belota said. That almost made it look like it was a government party as opposed to just having one informant reporting to the FBI. As some of the defense lawyers acknowledged in court, many of the men were recorded making offensive remarks or statements advocating violence about law enforcement officers, Miss Witmer, or politicians in general. One FBI agent testified that Mr. Caserta had posted on social media that the Second Amendment gave him the right to kill agents of the government when they became tyrannical. Jesus Christ. It's not like he mocked AOC's idiotic ball gown or something. That's violence.
Literal violence.
That's literal violence. The chief tension of the case was whether speech like that crossed a line into criminal activity. If I don't like the governor and it's rough talk, I can do that in our country, Mr. Hill said after the verdict was announced and his client left the courthouse. Yes, you can do that in America, but if only if it's against people the Democrat wouldn't like. That's when it's okay. So here's what Glenn Greenwald said. He said, note the enormous gap between A, the media coverage devoted to the FBI's pre-election announcement that it broke up a right-wing plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer, and B, the jury's refusal to convict the key defendants following evidence that the plot was actually driven by the FBI. Well, of course, there's a gap, Glenn. How were they supposed to beat Trump on the issues? Remember when countless journalists, pundits, and politicians screeched with such righteous certitude about Governor Whitmer kidnapping plot as though it were established fact, when the only thing that's now been established is that it was a botched FBI entrapment plot? No, I don't remember that, Michael. I forget things when I'm supposed to like a real Democrat. Okay? And here it is. 2 years ago, if you suggested that Gretchen Witmer kidnapping plot was potentially FBI entrapment, you were called a conspiracy theorist. $20 says they still call you that now anyway. So Max Blumenthal is here from the Grayzone. Let's get your take on that, Matt.
I'm a conspiracy factualist.
Uh-huh.
And, I just wonder, like, if the FBI cooked up a plot to kill you and kidnap you, wouldn't you be mad?
I would be mad.
Gretchen Witmer seems fine with it.
No problem.
Just like,
isn't that wild? Like, why
weird.
isn't she screaming?
Like, it would actually make me more mad if the FBI came in, rounded up a bunch of gun-toting militia members who were, some of them mentally unstable, and riled them up to kill me.
Right? That's what they did.
I would be upset. I would be demanding a federal investigation of the FBI. I would be like demanding an independent prosecutor. But Gretchen Witmer went along with this apparently for partisan reasons, because this was part of what I would say was a plot against Trump to link his denunciations. I mean, he was messing with Whitmer too. He was denouncing her for her harsh lockdowns. He thought that the lockdowns were a plan or part of a plan to tank the economy ahead of the election, and that if he didn't resolve the lockdowns quickly enough, that he would lose. And so you have these guys running up in the Michigan state capitol. What they did was an act of pure intimidation with guns, trying to intimidate the governor, demanding the end of the lockdown. It was the worst thing that could have happened also for COVID skeptics or people who are skeptical and critical of the restrictions, because it framed it completely in a partisan and culture war light. And they attached their informants onto that group in order, and so it was just part of a much wider setup, not only setting these characters up, but attaching them to Trump, because Trump had tweeted "Liberate Michigan."
Right.
That's why you saw those tweets claiming that Donald Trump was just as guilty as these characters were. Like that was the secret code to enact the Civil War. And the informants were so central in this plot that actually one of them rose to vice president or number 2 in this Michigan militia. He rose quickly through the ranks and found his way into a leadership role. The entire plot was conceived by the FBI. And it has far-reaching implications. For example, as Christian Parenti pointed out in the piece he published at the Grayzone on how the left or the lockdown left lost its mind, it sees opposition to lockdowns and COVID restrictions in the light of intrigues like this and near and intimidating protests by these characters. And so this put that on the national stage. But this also is the FBI's MO. This is what the FBI has been doing since the dawn of the war on terror, which is setting up mentally unstable and vulnerable people. There was a guy named James Cromedy who was a Muslim convert, and the FBI was constantly trying to entice him into a violent plot. This is back in 2009. He refused again and again and again, and then he lost his job. So the FBI came in posing as Al-Qaeda agents and said, here's $250,000. Will you agree to do it? Then they did it. He's in jail. So many people have gone down over fake plots. Virtually every major terror bust was conceived by the FBI. Why, if ISIS and Al-Qaeda were such a threat to the United States, did the FBI have to invent plots for them? Why? The answer is very clear. The FBI was trying to justify its bureaucratic priorities. This is essentially a form of the FBI and the Department of Justice lobbying for their own budget.
Yeah.
And as soon as ISIS fades away, mysteriously, when the US and the CIA ceased their dirty war in Syria, which had created a weapons farm for ISIS and allowed them to seize territory, which became a base for their global propaganda operations, as soon as that comes to an end, then you have, what do we have left? We have, from ISIS, we have to go to white cis. And they want to go after the far right in the US, so they have to cook up these plots. Obviously it helped. I think it helped influence the election in a major way. And then it flows into January 6th, where after January 6th, I was told by a journalist, actually, who's just a straightforward journalist, very, like, far less of an advocacy journalist than I am, who was visited by the FBI because this journalist covers the far right, covers the left as well. He told me that every single grassroots far right figure that he knows has been visited by the FBI since January 6th. So there's no accountability.
You had a guy on your show I saw in Rockfin.
Yeah.
I don't know what his name was, but he was the one who talked about how the problem wasn't Trump, that the problem for the elite, the oligarchy, for the establishment is the people who flex their muscle at the ballot box and actually to put a thumb in the eye of the establishment, and they voted for Trump, and then they voted for Brexit. And that they couldn't. So that's the real problem. And that's why all the energy is put in to demonizing Trump supporters and people who are for Brexit as racists and all this horrible thing. So they can justify suppressing them, putting them in prison, doing stuff like this. Is that right?
Yeah, I had two guests that would also be great guests for this show, CJ Hopkins and Alexander McKay. Both of them are leftists who framed the Covidian regime in terms of the ongoing war on populism, whether it was the left populism that rose to the surface with Bernie's campaign or the right-wing populism that gave rise to Trump and Brexit. And so, yes, this is of a part with the discrediting of right-wing populism to frame it as insurrectionism. And we saw the insurrectionist narrative return with the trucker convoy in Ottawa, where Canadian leadership, like the Liberal Party and the NDP, freely threw around the word insurrectionist and accused the truckers of trying to take over the government and stoke a civil war in Canada, when in fact, what they were demanding was that the Canadian government respect the Charter of Values and that it lift this cross-border mandate that truckers had to abide. I mean, their demands are very clear. They weren't demanding the government step down. They weren't trying to drive their trucks through the Capitol building. So this is the narrative going forward. And pretty much anything that threatens the establishment right now I mean, at some point it could come from the left. Right now it's coming from the right, and it is framed consistently in terms of civil war and insurrectionism, including the trucker convoy that attempted to enter D.C. 2 weeks ago and was blocked by the Department of Homeland Security working with the D.C. police. I personally witnessed it. I personally witnessed the National Guard bring close to 10,000 soldiers into D.C. They were set up for days and days in advance of these truckers trying to come in with permits, or they were seeking permits. And they were setting up massive, like armored personnel carriers under bridges in D.C. They were blocking off highways in advance of them. And they were preparing for civil war, but it was also perception management to condition the public in D.C. for this, to cultivate in their minds the sense that they were under siege from right-wing populists, in other words, the truckers. I went to meet with the truckers. Haven't had a chance to pull together my footage and put together like a short little video documentary, but I will. I went up to Hagerstown, and they were there, and I talked to their leadership. The last thing they wanted to do was another January 6th. That was their biggest fear, and they were just trying to get permits, and they wanted to have a peaceful protest. Their only demand was getting rid of the cross-border mandates and getting rid of emergency law, but they were framed as like literal terrorists. Now they're on their way. They're here in California.
Yeah. Well, we're going to cover that on Friday. I'm going to put together a package because we were at that Defeat the Mandate U.S. Rally that was last Sunday down in Grant Park in downtown Los Angeles, which was a big success, and there was a lot of great speakers. And Max, you spoke, I spoke, and
you were the best speaker. I was third best, maybe.
I would. I wouldn't. I'd definitely put you up there. So definitely top three for sure. Yeah,
definitely.
I would say that 14-year-old kid who I had to follow, wearing the same suit coat I am, goes up and starts screaming. Anyway, it was fun.
You got to play footage of that.
It was fun. I will play footage. I should play some of his speeches and show how. Yeah.
No, you were backstage and you were about to go up, and then all of a sudden they move a 14-year-old kid with a suit kind of like Alex P. Keaton.
Yes.
Like a populist Alex P. Keaton. They move him ahead of you. I'm like, is this kid running against Newsom? Like,
yeah.
He just starts screaming.
And he just started screaming, and the crowd went nuts to see a little kid scream his head off. And I was like, God damn it, I got to follow. Can you have me just follow a regular boring person? Like, it was so I can look funnier than I am. That's how I like it. Because it's outside during the day, hard to get laughs, and no roof, right? But
I like what you said at the end. You
called them white supremacists.
You called the crowd white supremacists. There were so many white supremacists there, especially the
Islam people from Islam,
the Nation of Islam, yeah. And the many brown and black people who were there as well. But you said that you have more in common with them than you have with the oligarchy.
That's right.
Which represent the real winners of the pandemic.
That's right.
And you get attacked for going there. They're like, you're hanging out with right wingers. And honestly, I talked to so many people there who were leftists and union members.
Me too.
But that's what this is all about. The focus on these militia members as the terrorists, to focus on the threat of insurrectionists. Like, we've witnessed a coup year after year, and it's not being carried out by a bunch of backwoods rednecks with AR-15s. It's been carried out by
Goldman Sachs,
by Bill Gates, by the oligarchy, by big tech, again and again, and they control the uniparty in Washington, which is basically just a bunch of marionettes. I mean, you can't really tell the difference between Mitt Romney and, I don't know, Chris Murphy on most issues at this point, especially on foreign policy.
You can't tell the difference between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden.
No, you can't, especially when it comes to, Ukraine and proxy wars abroad.
That's right. Come see a live stand-up show or be in Orlando, Tampa, Cleveland, Columbus, Pittsburgh, Las Vegas, Omaha, Des Moines, everywhere. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for our live show tickets. Also, become a premium member, get access to all our extra stuff, and help support the show. See you at a live show. Single tickets now available. Single tickets available.